Welcome, my friends, to the Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Returning to the show tonight is Neil Sanders. Neil is an expert on the subject of mind control and the process by which the Matrix manipulates the thoughts, beliefs, and values of the unsuspecting masses. Neil is the author of the book, Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own, Volumes 1 and 2, which I highly recommend to anyone wanting to understand just how embedded mind control is in our daily lives. Along with his book, Neil's band Turn Barrel has released a new CD, and one of the tracks, Come With Us, can be heard at the conclusion of this interview. As always, the discussion with Neil is very wide-ranging, as we discuss how political and societal agendas are marketed and sold through all forms of media, especially social media, in order to either fabricate consensus or to create division. And so, without further ado, here's Neil Sanders. Now, I know today we want to talk about a couple of topics, and one of them being advertising and marketing techniques in the political arena. So I was wondering if you could expand upon that a little bit.
Well, I mean, obviously at the minute we've got elections going off in England, and we've got elections about to go off in America, and you get to see similar tactics trotted out. It's about presentation and such like that. It's very strange in England at the minute. We've got the referendum for the EU, whether to stay in or stay out. And one of the good things is that basically it's really good that people are talking about stuff. Actually people are getting involved in issues that might affect them. Now, this is only slight words. It's completely sullied by the fact that nobody's talking in facts. Everybody's slinging mud and demonstrable lies, essentially. Nobody really wants to have a discussion. And there's nefarious tactics on both sides. Quite clever marketing techniques, really. I mean, let's start with the Remain campaign. One of the things that I've noticed is that they're trying to appeal to a certain demographic, and how they're marketing their strategy is they're playing on people's egos. They're suggesting that this is the more intelligent, more reasoned. This is the view to show that you're not a racist. Some of those elements may well be true, but that is the marketing strategy that they're pinning on that particular area. Now, on the flip side, and it's disingenuous, it's kind of creepy. Like, rather than use facts, you're using an appeal to emotion. Exactly the same on the other side. For the Out campaign, they're tending to play on people's fears of immigration, some of which is, I can kind of see why people would say, some of it which is completely nonsensical and just tied to people's fears. But also they're playing on people's sense of injustice. A lot of people feel disenfranchised at the minute. We're going through austerity. The economy is uncertain. We're being forced into wars. A lot of people feel like they don't have a lot of control in their life. And so what they're sort of hinting subtly with their campaign is, by making this vote, you can take back a bit of control of your life. You can take back some power. This will be something that you've done where you've influenced a decision. And they're essentially suggesting that the country, and by definition and trickle down, you individually will get back your sovereignty. May well be true. That's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm talking about is the methodology that's used. It's quite similar to some of the concepts that Donald Trump is actually using. I can see why Donald Trump appeals to people, because again he appears to offer something other than the norm. Something again, people feel disenfranchised by the establishment. They feel disenfranchised by politicians in general, by so many institutions that have let them down again and again and again. And so what he's doing is very, very cleverly giving the perception of being somebody that's outside of that. And again, with slogans like "Make America Great" and stuff like that, what's clever about that is what's called an unfinished claim. He may mean it. Again, that's not the point of the discussion. The point of the discussion is, what does that mean, make America great again?
What does great mean?
Exactly. It allows you, the voter or the recipient of that particular message, to basically put your own meaning to it. Oh, what I think he means by this is this. The important point about all of those things, Obama did exactly the same thing with, change. Was it change we can believe in? Or
Hope and change.
Hope and change, yeah. What does that mean?
Right.
It doesn't mean anything, If that appeals to you, it's an appeal to nostalgia. It's very, very clever, and again,
You put it into your own context is what you do.
exactly.
Hope means this to me. Change means this to me. Great means this to me. But
Yeah,
that doesn't necessarily mean how they're defining it.
no, and the important point is to just have positive words. It's not different from just do it, or the best a man can get, or the drive of your life, or whatever. Any of these sort of slogans, it's the same point. They don't actually really say anything. They give an impression, and as you say, they allow people to sort of pour their own meaning to that, basically. So it's very, very it's very sleazy, a lot of it, to be quite honest. But this is politics all over, really. But yeah, we're seeing certainly an awful lot of it in the UK at the minute.
Do you find it disconcerting, Neil? I mean, I see this stuff going on too, and it just seems like we're in a big commercial all the time.
Yeah, very much so. And I think what something that struck me recently is how partisan people are. You know, people are very staking their colours to the mast with a lot of these things, which is strange because essentially, you know, the whole point of a vote is it's supposed to be secret, or it's a secret ballot or whatever. It just seems very, very divisive, if you know what I mean. It's a very, very easy way to just pit people against one another, particularly if a lot of the campaign, for want of a better word, is smears and out and out lies and stuff like that. Basically, there's something about the whole thing that's very uneasy making. Basically, I was talking to somebody in America the other day, and they were saying about how there's so many sort of different sort of anti-police movements, Black Lives Matter type movements. There's a lot of tension, and a lot of people again identifying with groups and the like, and rather than sort of coming to any type of agreement or whatever, really sort of separating themselves and having very stark views that are in opposition to almost everybody else, and that's all of these groups apparently. And to me, it smacks of a social experiment. There's something not quite right about it. Do you know what I mean? It just feels like you're being manipulated. That they're using certain things. And again, I think social media is one of the things that they're using.
Oh, yeah.
In order to get people really riled up and get people into positions that seem like they're actually researching or exploring a topic, but actually it's really, really narrow the scope that you're drawn in, because again you're pushing yourself into these groups. You've got the acceptance of a group. You've all of a sudden got a sort of an ideology, or at least a sort of a new way of thinking that you can explore that basically allows you to make some sort of sense of the world. It might give you some sort of answers that you've been lacking elsewhere, or an explanation for something that you'd not thought of before. And it's when people are sort of bound in these groups like this that they're more easy to manipulate. You know, you've seen people in the American elections, you've seen people on both sides of the political divide acting like complete idiots, attacking people. You know, you've seen Trump supporters punching people inside the conventions. You've seen Clinton supporters attacking other Clinton supporters because they thought they were Trump supporters.
Yeah.
So it's ridiculous, and none of this is actually advancing any type of political discord. It's just people stamping their feet and acting childishly and saying, essentially, everything's got to be the way that I think it is, otherwise we're not going to play anymore. And it just, again, to me, it just seems incredibly divisive at the minute, and I think a lot of it is to do with saying people trying to gain capital off of events, utilizing social media to try and twist any and all media events that come across, or world events that sort of come across them, in order to twist them to somehow prove their own agenda, or to somehow sort of like advance their argument in some way. And it's just, you know, ludicrous, particularly when we live in a world of memes nowadays. Do you know what I mean? Most people get their political arguments from memes. 90% of them are just wrong. And what irritates me about that is, you're on the internet. Check it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? You Googled the meme. Google the answer, or at least and
at least try.
Yeah, and that's the other point. I've been researching this topic heavily now. Do you mean you've watched 3 YouTube videos that basically all have exactly the same concept? That's not research, right? That's not how to write an essay. You need to have 4 or 5 points pro your argument and 4 or 5 points counter your argument. And then you need to basically cross-examine this material, and you'll find that the answer is usually somewhere in the middle, or veering off to one side, left or right. Some of your preconceptions were right, some of them were wrong, and some things that you'd never even thought about before become strikingly obvious. This I also feel is exacerbated by social media. There's one thing that I've noticed recently. Aside from, I think we've talked about this before, the concept that basically is isolation and overstimulation, which just conveniently happens to be the CIA's torture manual first line. Like, if you want to turn people into vegetables, make them easily malleable, isolate them and overstimulate them, which is, why you put people in a cell on their own and have a light on or white noise playing. It does exactly that. I think we've talked about the concept that basically you're gambling with social information, and you're essentially playing with your ego a little bit by putting a post down. You might get a like, might get a dislike, yeah. But if you get a like, you actually get a dopamine response, yeah. Which is why people are starting to get addicted to social media in the same way that people get addicted to gambling. And I'm pretty sure we also talked about the fact that, if you start to notice that certain posts get you more likes or more popularity or whatever, you might post more of those.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? You might slightly alter your output. And do you know why? Because it's lovely to get praise of people and to get that reassurance and that recognition. What's really cunning about Facebook is the longer you spend on it, the less interaction with with real human beings you have. Right. The less social you are. So that praise from other people in your virtual world becomes so much more powerful, and you get locked into that loop, basically. Here's the other things that I've just thought recently about Facebook. It makes you think that you've got to have an opinion. Not only that you've got to have an opinion, but that other people need to hear your opinion. And furthermore, that your opinion actually matters or makes sense. Like, you know what, it might do, but you're not, that's not the point of this. And just because you can say something doesn't mean that you necessarily should. The other thing that I've noticed as well is it's heightening people's concept of self-importance. People feel that they're connected somehow to events that are happening in a more personal way than has been seen before. So you're getting people demanding, like with the Orlando shooting, like you see people, I want to see pictures of the bodies. It's nothing to do with you. Like that always confuses me, because, and this may be an English-American thing, because in England it would be very rare to show dead bodies, particularly immediately in the aftermath of an event that's transpiring in front of your eyes and such like that. So that has always confused me, why you think you would be privy to these things. Show me the CCTV and stuff like that. You'd have to go to court to see these things. They're not going to email it to you because you're just some bloke on the internet. That's as am I. Do you know what I mean? That's sort of kind of the point of research, freedom of information requests and investigative journalism and that type of thing. But these various combinations of things can be wonderful. They can be brilliant. But also it's desperately, desperately easy to fall into, to go along with the things, as we said, that make you seem sort of more popular or that get you the least aggravation. Or on the flip side, that get you the most aggravation, because some people thrive on arguing and proving, their intellectual superiority, which is again not really the way to actually, advance an argument or to learn anything.
Yeah, it's all this debate that goes on. You mentioned people being in groups. When you were talking about that, I thought to myself, well, that's tried and true, to keep people in groups. And so that this group doesn't like that group.
Yeah.
And so they go back and forth at each other. And it has become exasperated by the fact that today we do have all of this social media out there. So now the groups Whereas before, when we didn't have Facebook and all the other social media outlets that we have, the people were still fighting with each other, but they were doing it based upon watching the nightly news or their
Yeah.
newspaper, whatever. Now, they can actually fight with each other directly. In other words, they can just go right at each other on social media. And,
Absolutely.
right?
You don't have to go down the docks to listen to the trade union meeting. You can get all your information from John, who went there. You can email it, or
Right.
you know, just put the potted highlights on social media. But in the same way that basically journalism is suffering worldwide because of as the concept of journalism, you know, this idea that essentially it's too expensive because you've got rolling journalism. It's too expensive to have journalists sort of positioned all over in every single country in the world. You have them in the sort of major centres, but like you'll rely more on news wires. And so basically there'll be a reporter for AP or a reporter for Reuters that lives in the area. He'll get the story, and then that story will get repeated around the world, basically, for economic purposes. The problem is, if that guy gets it wrong, then it's wrong until until somebody points out.
If anybody ever points it out.
If anyone points it out, because yeah, quite right. The news doesn't tend to like to say, yeah, you know that stuff that we've just told you, scrap that.
It's not self-correcting.
No, exactly. And in a very similar way, I think that happens with the internet. And one of the things is because, and again, I think we discussed this before, you've got an audience on social media, despite the fact that you're on your own. You have an audience. And so, you know, getting punked by somebody in front of your peers suddenly takes on a far greater significance. And you might also, basically, because you're part of the group, feel that you need to show your allegiance to the group, maybe, you know, not necessarily consciously. And so you're going to have to, you know, pull out your big guns and destroy this, this heathen that doesn't stick to the party line. But here's the point, okay? And this is true of any group, essentially. There's a very clever chap in advertising that essentially called Douglas Aitken, and he's made more money than so many people. But his chief concept was, why do people get so attached to different products? Why do they speak of products in like evangelical terms? Why do people love their iPhones? Like physically love their iPhones to the point where their synaptic response is that of seeing a boyfriend or a girlfriend when they actually hear the ringtone. It's because adherence to a group, be it a cult, be it any mass group, a sports team, well, essentially he wanted to find out why people join cults, and what would send somebody from, you know, perfectly reasonable follower of something to a complete acolyte. And he discovered essentially across the board, people, they need the company of others, and they want to know what the world's all about, and they want to know where they fit into the world. It's as straightforward as that. Political parties or cults or affiliation to certain brand identity or whatever, that's the basis that they work on. They work on this affiliation to the group. So that's why in the sort of in and out campaign, basically, they've been saying, like, you know, they've been using incredibly broad techniques because people can relate to them in a sort of tribal sense. The language has been incredibly tribal, basically, and that is the reason why it's a tried and tested marketing technique that is used again and again throughout politics, throughout advertising, throughout basically anybody that's trying to lull you or draw you into some group for their own benefit or for the benefit of the group rather than necessarily yourself.
That's a good point, though. But you talked about being tribal. I was thinking in terms of they cater to really the primitive desires and needs of people. I want to be heard. I need to be important. You know, that's where people start getting into the bickering and the fighting, and you have these different groups. So it's not even, you know, how do I say this without sounding like I'm too snooty?
No, you're absolutely right. Because
it's not at an intellectual level.
No, it's at the reptilian level. It's seriously that's the exact phrase. This is Clotaire Repay, who basically, again, this is going to be my next point. How do you appeal to somebody to get them to initially like your product? All products, and by products I mean personalities, celebrities, ideologies, political parties, political figures. They're all product. Okay, there's a conception behind the construction of their image and the presentation to the public. How do you sell them? You sell them on an emotional level, and which appeals to the reptilian brain, and you justify it on an intellectual level that appeals to the conscious. Okay, what's an example of that? And the reason you do that is because your limbic system always wins. Right? Okay, you'll justify it in some way, but it will win because it's more powerful. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's impervious to everything. It's just that they have to find the thing that appeals to you. Basically, let's have an example. The Hummer, it's a weapon. We sell it as a weapon. Why? Because that appeals to your instinctual drive to want to kill other people and be the most powerful person, because we know the benefits of being the most powerful person out there. You're high on the road, okay, you're in a military vehicle. Yeah. It is a weapon. So there's the bait. How do we justify that? Because you can't drive down the road saying, look at my weapon. What you will do is you'll say, yeah, it's for the kids. I'm protecting, my wife and children. This is the safest vehicle on the road. It is a weapon. It's a defensive weapon. And so that's exactly how they actually do it. The same thing with Jordans, similar. Essentially, how are they selling Jordans? Because you'll get sex if you have those, because you'll prove yourself to be the better basketball player, because this will give you the edge, and you'll be the superior male, and therefore all the women will flock to you. So what's the intellectual standpoint on them? Well, there's two. One, they're obviously make me a better basketball player, and that's tied into the second one. They must be good because they're expensive, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. That's how we know that a Mercedes is a good car, because it costs a lot. But do you know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily true. In fact, particularly in Europe, Mercedes' quality has been notoriously poor, apparently, of recent years. But it's got that brand identity, the constructed image around it. And this is the point. Any image that's they have to sell something to you. Like, do you know what I mean? They're lying. This is the sales.
Does it bother you, Neil, when you think about how easily led around humans are?
Yes and no. Sometimes, yes, but it's not really for me to. I might be wrong. They might all be right. It's not necessarily for me to say that. You know what I mean? But yeah, it certainly does when you can see people directed towards hatred towards people. That people get very, very swept up in things and so passionate. The attacks on people and stuff like that. For a cause. But
yeah, that's what I meant. Like pushing buttons to create conflict, to create debate, argument, to create those types of things. They really have the art of pushing people's buttons down.
Oh, totally, absolutely. You know what's really interesting? Okay, nobody that does, very rarely, people that do what would be considered hateful actions by an outsider do it because they think of themselves as a bad person. Most racists, or neo-Nazis that go out and beating up black people or something, they don't think of themselves as terrible people. They think of themselves as protecting something. Nearly nobody thinks of themselves as a bad person. They will justify their actions as saying, they might acknowledge that their actions are extreme or in some cases terrible, but they're justified. Because the enemy that they're fighting, or the ideology that they're fighting against, is so much worse. And so you're absolutely right. It's very easy to sort of direct people into doing stuff that, if you took a step back and looked at it, it's monstrous. What if you're wrong? What if you're not right? What if you've been misled, or the information that you've taken up's wrong, and you've been berating a poor, innocent person in the most terrible way for the past year? There is a thing called stochastic terrorism, which we were talking a little bit about before we came on air, and usually it refers to a rabble rouser, maybe like a Rush Limbaugh figure, or Bill O'Reilly's been accused of it, Sean Hannity's been accused of it, Islamic hate preachers have been accused of it. Essentially, it's using the media to put out an opinion that's usually biased, or in some cases completely untrue, to direct a certain portion of the population to believe that. It's essentially propaganda. The terroristic part of it comes into it, where basically by sort of preaching, say, exaggerated figures or lies about influence of Islamic terrorists in England, in your country, or any other minority group or whatever, you could influence somebody to go out and commit a crime based on their actions, or because they've bought into your ideology, basically. And so you could say that the extremist views espoused by somebody which might then get them to go, yeah, you're absolutely right. The problem is foreigners in this country, and they walk into a shopping centre and shoot a load of foreigners. That would be the result of stochastic terrorism, basically. Now, I wonder if there is a degree of that that's causing this dissension within the research community, and it could be done in two ways. It could be done by basically setting up figures that know what they're doing, that they're using sort of very guru-like tactics and very driven, no holds barred. This is the way it is, and anybody that doesn't think the same way that I'm thinking is wrong and is an MI5 agent or a CIA agent or a shill or something like that.
Right.
To drive people in an evangelical way, because as I say, all the things that we talked about before, that acceptance to a group, the explanation of life, explaining the world, finding your position in it, and stuff like that, it can be utilised in such a way. The second way would be basically people who are well-meaning, completely innocent of it, and just feeding them disinformation, just feeding them false information, or feeding them information in such a way that, again, it could direct their research into a particular way that seems plausible, and the more you get into it, it seems totally plausible. But from an exterior point, it's a very extreme or very alien, to the point where it might actually alienate you from other people. And then, as we say, what happens off the back of that, because you're in this group thing, and because the internet has no charm and no manners at all, somebody will go, "Oh, you think that, do you? You're a moron," and then you're in an argument.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And more and more, that's all you tend to see, isn't it? Really, basically, just rather than reasoned discussion, people pinning themselves to ideologies and gaining some sort of traction or some sort of sense of identity, perhaps, off the elements that would be connected to that particular group.
Now, one of the reasons, Neil, related to this, that I don't allow comments on my videos when I do the interviews is because I don't want to have that inane commentary taking place to take away from the message of the person that has come onto the show to share their expertise, their research, their ideas or thoughts. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, going back to the social media and tying it into what you were just talking about with the stochastic terrorism, is this whole thing where everybody believes that they have some right to then attack other people based upon differences in ideology or philosophies, right?
Absolutely, and often this is couched in the concept, and if you basically disagree with that or remove it or don't allow comments for perfectly sensible reasons, often you'll get the people are saying, "Oh, you're impinging on my freedom of speech.
Exactly.
My freedom of speech gives me the right to say this. My freedom of speech, blah 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 blah." You're absolutely right, but not without consequence. And here's the thing about freedom of speech: nobody has to give you a platform for it. Right. Like, you can say what you want, but it doesn't mean that anyone has to A, agree with you, B, give you a platform for it, or C, react in the way that you expect,
or even listen to you.
Or even listen to you, absolutely.
Right.
But again, I think that's the thing again with social media. It does give people a voice, and they see other people being listened to, and so it makes you feel that you're, like we said earlier, that your opinion is more important than perhaps it is. So to the point where, again, it's just an opinion. We're all allowed to have different opinions, and I don't necessarily just mean the people that are posting. I mean, people are going, no, I disagree with that, and I've got to go on there and I've got to correct this person. I've got to call them an idiot for thinking that, and blah 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 blah. And it's a toxic environment because it's an emerging technology still. Do you know what I mean? Like, people are still not quite used to it, basically, as well. I think people have not quite fallen into the groove yet.
It's very counterproductive in so many ways, because people spend all of their time being separated, being in these groups, having themselves essentially categorized. Yeah. And just going back and forth at each other. And,
it feels productive.
Right. They think it's being productive because I'm going to get my point across because that comment that person posts on Facebook is moronic, and
Yep.
I'm going to set it straight. And then, all of this stuff follows after that. You have like a scroll of comments with 2 or 3 people going back and forth.
Yeah.
And it's completely unproductive because you're not going to change anybody's opinion in
No.
that scroll's length of commentary, right? The person who thought this is still going to think that, and the person who thought that is still going to think this when all is said and done. And so it becomes this exercise of flogging yourself,
Well, here's the thing that I thought earlier. We've lost debate and we've gained debate. Nobody debates in the sense of having a chat about it, going over points. Everyone debates like a debating society now, where the whole point is not to come to the truth, it's to win.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It's to intellectually destroy your opponent. And if you can, humiliate them by showing how ignorant they are or how naive they are whilst you're doing it. And I'm sure, I'm sure I've done it. Like, it's easy to fall into that trap. But as you were saying, people get this concept that they're actually doing something that's very counterproductive, sat there basically arguing on Facebook or Twitter all day. It allows you to reach quite a large audience by basically, you can post, say, 4 or 5 videos that you found on YouTube or whatever, that you may agree with or whatever. And then all of a sudden you're a researcher or a disseminator of information. And again, that's great, it's really good, but it depends how you do it. If you're doing it and saying basically this is the only truth and there's nothing other than this, then essentially you're becoming a cult leader. Like, do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, but it's incredibly easy to fall into that. And what I wish to reiterate is that I think it's by design. I think the whole thing is by design. I think if this isn't a perfect storm, they must have been aware that these things would happen. Do you know what I mean? There's numerous studies that go on at Harvard that show the effects and the antisocial effects of social media. Mix that with politics and the broader media and the rabble-rousing effect that it can cause. And it just starts to look like a big social experiment.
Yes.
Particularly, when you're getting into sort of like, again, I think we discussed it. I'm sure people are familiar with the concept that Sean Parker and InQtel and the various CIA connections in the foundation of Facebook. InQtel is like the CIA's venture capitalist arm, and it just invested huge amounts of money into Facebook. Why is the CIA got a venture capitalist like area? And as far as I'm aware as well, like I think they even say on their official literature that they're interested in changing perceptions and that's influencing ideas and influencing thoughts of populations and stuff like that. And this group, I mean, particularly when you know about this sort of the NSA sort of data mining all your calls, all your email interactions, everything. They're categorizing people, they're putting people into groups. I think this is what it is, and I think people are falling for it a little bit.
Well, a lot of people will ask me, Neil, they'll say, Mike, you don't put a lot of personal stuff on Facebook. It really mirrors your blog. And maybe, I'll post the radio shows up on Facebook. I said, that's exactly right. Because my personal life is my personal life, and I'm not going to air my life out because I know exactly what Facebook is being used for. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have, like, information on me. So I don't want people thinking that I believe that I'm, like, dodging the bullet they're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to help them.
No, and I mean, aside from anything else, I believe it was The Onion, and they do a really hilarious satire where they're awarding the CIA admit that Facebook is a data mining tool or whatever, and one of the agents says, well, one of the most successful things that we did was convincing people that sharing every aspect of their life was anything other than ridiculously sinister. And it is. I think there's a very good joke that's been circulated around. It was in a newspaper or something. It's like, I want more friends. So I've been acting like I do on Facebook. I've been walking up to random people and telling them what I'm doing today, showing them pictures of my food, giving them thumbs up when I like their comments, like repeating their comments to other people that I don't know. But strangely, so far, I spend the evenings alone. And it's absolutely right. It's a new type of behaviour that's being created. It is essentially it's second nature. The way that people, now sort of, it's unusual to see somebody without a phone.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like without and if anyone's got any time at all, be it 10 seconds where they're not doing something, then they need to be on their phone either checking their emails or on Facebook or playing Angry Birds or whatever they do and stuff like that. And it's the other thing that I think is interesting is that this, and whether again this is by design or just by sheer coincidence, due to the vast nature of YouTube, the vast nature of everything, essentially, the ways that you can pick what time you start your film on Netflix and stuff like that, people's attention span's going to nothing, which again feeds into this concept of I want answers to this immediately.
Yeah, they want memes, like you said before, memes and sound bites.
Yeah. Memes and sound bites. This is the point. And again, that used to be just the cachet. Again, in politics. I mean, politics is essentially soundbite politics nowadays. I mean, it has been for a long, long time. But isn't it strange that like a marketing soundbite? But isn't it strange that life's becoming soundbite as well? Like again, life is almost. It is. That's the thing. You're essentially marketing your brand on social media. You're picking and choosing little elements that and portraying things and putting things out in a certain way. You're building up. Yeah, it's almost like a Sims character. You're building a virtual life for yourself online. And again, I'm sure we talked about this as well, but like people lie on Facebook and Instagram. Like, I mean, like there's whole YouTube channels that are dedicated to like, catching people out in photoshopping or, standing in front of cars that aren't yours or that thing. Christ, there's a whole program, catfishing. Like, where you're pretending to be somebody, the program's called Catfish, isn't it? Is where you pretend to be somebody that you're not. You create a persona online and get into a relationship with somebody or something like that. But yeah, it's becoming very, very, very strange. Recently, I read that Dale Carnegie book, the How to Make Friends and How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it's a lot of common. It's basically mostly common sense. But there was a point that was really sort of I took away from it. There was like that's true. If you want to get somebody on your side, make them like you. If you want to try and convince somebody to do something, make them feel important. That's the main principle. There's numerous ways you could do this in sales and marketing, whatever. Which he suggests stuff like ask questions about the person, show a genuine interest, listen, repeat their name constantly because it shows that you have a personal connection to them. If you want to make somebody do something, again, give them a title, give them a challenge. Right? Do you know how many people can be made to do monstrous and act like total arses in a workplace because they've been promoted to team leader? Do you know what I mean? No extra financial influence, but you've got the title of team leader, and it's very much like the sort of the Milgram experiment. The concept of the electrocution and stuff like that, and the driven by authority. The title. This is why I think a lot of people get so invested in not just in their jobs, but you could see why this would people could get obsessed with anything. But you see those people that really sort of they spend all day at the office, do you know what I mean? And they never get to see their kids and then run completely ragged and stuff like that. Not in all cases, but in some cases, basically, the more stress, the more difficult their job is, the more they need to be there, highlights the fact that they're, again, important. Their job is important, ergo they are important. Do you know what I mean? So these are, again, mechanisms that could be utilised in order to manipulate people. How's that done in this election scenario, in this political scenario? You're what's important. I'm speaking directly to you. You have a say. I'm listening to you, and I'm basically taking on board and speaking for you. Or again, I don't want to think I'm bashing anyone, but Trump does does that a lot of the times. You know what I mean? He appeals to the. I'm saying the things that everyone wants to say, but isn't allowed to. So I'm vicariously for you, pointing out the real causes of all your woes, because that and again, in some cases, what he's saying may well have an element of truth, but it's a technique. It's a technique that's used. And if anybody thinks that Trump doesn't have scriptwriters,
Of course.
then he's not saying these things. I don't believe that he's as organic as he makes out. I think he's playing a very, very clever game.
He's the perfect marketed candidate. When you think about it, Neil, I tell people, look, the public in the United States, I don't know how it is in the UK, but, people are addicted to their reality TV shows. They're addicted to wealth, addicted to bombastic types of behavior. And so, we live in a cartoon world here in the United States, right? And so what they've done with Trump, and again, I'm not picking on him. I'm just using him as an example because I can have the same types of discussions with Hillary and everybody else, right?
Completely.
Right.
Yeah, she just appears. They've pitched her to different demographic.
Exactly. So here we have a guy. He was a reality TV show persona, right? Personality. He's very wealthy. He's very, very loud and in your face. Yep. And so they put him out there because the public is at a point in their consciousness where that is what they're tuned into.
Yeah, and also, I don't think he is, but he gives the impression of being a self-made man, being a successful businessman, regardless of the start in life that he had. And again, I don't actually believe this is true, but he gives the impression that he has done this on his own, which again gives you the impression that, well, if he's done this, I can do this. Oh, and he may well be a fabulous businessman, because he doesn't actually release any details of his finances. We don't really know. But you're absolutely right. And I'm not really bashing Trump. I'm just talking about the techniques that he's actually using. Right. Did you say Hillary uses exactly the same flip side of the same techniques? She's essentially been using the similar thing to the Remain campaign, which is this concept that you probably should vote for me because if not, people are going to think you're racist.
Well, just for a moment, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but when you take a look at what's going on in the UK, where you have the Remain, you have the whole Brexit thing, right?
Yeah.
Stay in the European Union, stay out of it, right? Or remove ourselves from it. The same thing is taking place in the United States. You have Trump, who was the nation state, stay out of globalism, and you have Hillary, who was the globalist, saying, no, we've got to stay connected into the international world. So that's another thing that I didn't see many people kind of call out, that we have these very similar types of debates, arguments, and people playing these very similar roles across the pond.
Yeah, and I think again they're appealing to people's fears, and I think what's really strange as well, and I don't know if this is. I don't believe this is representative, but it's pitched in the media as almost like a class issue as well. Do you know what I mean? Like the sort of middle class or intelligentsia would be on the left, whereas the sort of working class blue collar sort of people would be on the right. I don't believe that's true, but again, these are the sort of the teams that are being presented for you to fall in line, and I think that sort of does draw some people in, because again, if you're putting out all these different baits, aren't you? Do you think this? Well, you should be in this team. Are you this? Well, you should be in this team. Are you this? You should be in this team. And then by association, people assume that all the aspects of that you fully agree with, or that you completely disagree with all the aspects of the other side. There's something that basically, again, the nonsense that is pitched about in all of these things. There was one thing that amused me earlier. Somebody had put up basically who was a pro-exit and again, maybe a very good point. There are 28 people, elected MPs or unelected MEPs, blah blah, that dictate your future in the European Parliament. You don't know any of their names. I thought, you know what, that's probably true. But you know what's also true? I'd warrant that about 60 to 75% of people in the UK couldn't name anyone other than the Prime Minister in the Cabinet. So, it's a lot of these arguments are moot. They're just, again, ways of drawing people into an actual group and supporting a position.
I think where you're going with this is there are people that they're not engaged to begin with. I mean, they don't know enough about anything to really influence or have an opinion on something, and all of a sudden they're pushed into, or they're placed into a situation where all of a sudden you have to have an opinion.
Yeah, exactly. And
have a position.
Yeah, and we have an arena where if you don't have a strong opinion, or if you don't have what could be considered a robust opinion, can't back it up, and by that I mean either with facts or with other people that support you, well then you might well get pilloried, which is again drawing back to this thing that we've been talking about this whole time of, like, the toxic nature of some of the interactions on social media, and the more you think about it, the more it all is connecting. And you start to think, I wonder,
Yeah.
I wonder.
Yeah.
But
It's crazy. It really is crazy, you know, and I watch it all the time. I like to think that most of the time I'm on the outside looking in. And when you have that type of positioning, where you try to be as objective as you possibly can, and you watch what goes on, and in a lot of ways, it's serious stuff in a way, because this kind of nonsense is kind of steering the ship, and it may go in a direction that's it's not beneficial to you or me or anybody else, but on the other hand, it almost gets down to being comical.
well, but again, I think that's the other point. Is from an exterior standpoint, you all end up looking silly. I mean, we're often in a position anyway where the theory or the concept or the evidence that you're trying to promote is counter to mainstream thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know you're on the back foot from the start. You add any degree of shrieking or discord or whatever, and it's just like, come on. Then the problem is as well, because of this group thing, you start to tar everybody with the same brush. An example of this, and again, it's not necessarily a fair example, but it's not dissimilar to the concept that again, I'm sure we've talked about this, the concept of creating the hippie, so that anybody that could be deemed as a hippie is considered a long-haired, druggy, dropout draft dodger,
Right.
and therefore their political opinion or their societal opinion obviously can't have any weight to it. It can be easily dismissed because they're categorised in that way. When Alex Jones went on the Piers Morgan show, or whatever show it was with Piers Morgan, and started screaming and screaming about guns and stuff like that, it allowed people to categorise all gun owners as hysterical. Probably just bad luck, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah,
Who knows?
that was not a good showing. I mean, he tried to put a good face on after that little adventure on CNN with Piers Morgan. But you're exactly right. His behavior was something that could be used to categorize
Yeah.
and vilify other people who believe here in the United States in the Second Amendment. I'm one of those people. And but I mean, as one of those people, I was not appreciative of his performance with Piers Morgan at all.
No, because it easily allows, and we live in an age nowadays where basically you can have an hour of completely sensible conversation and 10 seconds of you saying something that's a little bit extreme,
Yeah.
and they'll use that 10 seconds, and so it just seemed like a particularly naive thing. Of course, Piers Morgan is a very, very slimy person, and so that's what he does. He exists to get people into states like that because he makes good television for him. Basically.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily a criticism of Alex Jones. It's just, again, pointing out how something like that could be used.
Right.
And in similar ways, I've seen stuff, all over the place. Like, there is a concept, there is now becoming a concept, the concept of conspiracy theorists, which again we probably know was the idea of spreading that derogatory term, came from the Warren Commission, obviously, to stifle investigation into the Kennedy assassination. The concept now of a truther, which I think started off as again as a sort of 9/11 truthers was an investigative group. I remember seeing the T-shirts. That phrase has now again been absorbed by the mainstream to the point where it's almost a derogatory term, basically. So it's very, very, very tricky, basically. But they're very good at this sort of thing, like intelligence and counterintelligence and spinning false stories. They do it in the media, like with Operation Mockingbird. Do you know what I mean? Like influencing public opinion. Why has nobody thought that maybe they're doing this? We're getting to the point where we're very, very careful with any and all piece of news, possibly too careful. I think in a lot of cases, people are so desperate, as we spoke about before, desperate to prove a point or to find evidence of their preconceived notion, that it will just get ridiculous, to the point where, again, you're doing something called colouring the narrative. You've decided that you thought a previous incident happened in a particular way, and therefore every and all following incidents must follow that particular line. That, again, I think is a form of stochastic terrorism, and it's not criticism of people. I think that people, because of the medium, because of the way the information is presented, have been forced into a position whereby they do this. Because, again, you need to get the information out immediately. You've got fans, you've got people who are desperate to hear your opinion on what this incident is happening. And you want to be original, and you want to say the clever thing, you want to get to the crux of it as quickly as you possibly can. But that's bad research. That's really, really bad research. Like, just not waiting until all the information is coming. Like, anybody that basically puts up something that says, I'll figure this out in 5 minutes, well, you're probably wrong then, aren't you? Like,
yeah, that's right.
And if you've never even thought, crikey, I might be wrong on this, you almost certainly are. Because, again, there's too much information. What's interesting is that basically, that's the Tavistock Institute principle, the concept of future shock, too much information, like too much change happening in too short a period of time, to the point where basically it psychologically befuddles people. And what do people do when they're psychologically befuddled? They go to an authority figure. And an authority figure doesn't necessarily mean a person in government or a policeman or something like that. It can be somebody that's got information. It can be somebody that basically tells you something that reassures you or supports or nourishes you in some way. And again, I think we're seeing that an awful lot.
You mentioned about the information overload, and we definitely have information overload. It's all over the place, and some people confuse information with knowledge, and I explain to folks that information and knowledge are not the same thing.
Yes.
Information, you have good information, you have bad information, you have everything in between. So, what we have today is we just have this avalanche of information that's out there, and it's just spiraling, and it's going around in circles. And I think, Neil, that my personal view is that a lot of that is by design, in order to keep people and keep the population and the masses, and keep them off balance.
Yeah.
And to keep them constantly doing the things that we've been talking about that people are doing, which is essentially to bicker and debate and to fight with each other and have standoffs. I guess what the question I'm going to ask you is that how much of this do you believe is orchestrated versus it just happens because this is the nature of being a human being?
Well, I think what it is that they sort of set. I think some of it, as I said, is set up false information. People that are put into positions in the alternative media or on social media that spread this information and do it in such ways to just rile people up. But also, I think because of the mechanism, because of the things that's in place, you can plant seeds and just watch them sort of envelop in a very similar way to the concept of say Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Now we know that Al-Qaeda essentially was not really a real group. It was a collection of people, and then it was sort of Frankensteined together by mercenaries and CIA and various other ex-Mujahideen and that type of thing. Now, that doesn't mean that some bloke in, I don't know, anywhere in the world might go, I've heard of this Al-Qaeda, I support their ideology, I am now Al-Qaeda, and commit an act and then claim, like the Omar Matan, he's nothing to do with ISIS. Like, he just phoned up basically and pledged allegiance to it for whatever reason. I haven't personally heard that 9/11 call, not that necessarily I would be privy to that, but you could make the argument that that's a lie, that's propaganda to support America and most of Europe's foreign policy at present, because it just so happens to fit into the narrative.
Yeah.
But when people were saying, this guy's he's a terrorist, he's an ISIS terrorist, he says, no, he's not as simple as that, is it? If I stick a red flag on, that doesn't make me a blood. If I put a blue flag on, that doesn't make me. That's going to give me absolutely no credibility in Compton at all. I'll tell you that for nothing. If I stick a load of feathers up my arse, it doesn't make me a chicken. Like, no matter how fervently I pledge allegiance to the cause of chickens, it's nonsense. But again, this is how the propaganda works, essentially. One thing I have noticed as well is like there has been a shift back to like everybody sort of got on board with the idea that Al Qaeda was a constructive Western intelligence and that sort of thing. It became more and more obvious and such like that.
Right.
And then they rebranded. I know it's slightly different people, not in all cases. In some cases it's exactly the same. People are rebranded or refinanced different people to essentially make ISIS. And people seem to have fallen for that a lot more, by which I mean they believe the concepts that all people who follow Islam have this ideology, which is not point out. I say, go to Indonesia. Indonesia's got more Muslims than the Middle East, and it's lovely. There's a Stuart Lee joke. He goes, like all sensible people, I'm terrified of Muslims, except for all the ones that I've met who are lovely. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, people don't tend to see the hypocrisy of it. You know what's a problem? Extremists. I'm not going to sit here and be stupid and say that there's not a problem with extremist Islam. Of course there is. There's a problem with extremist feeders. There's a problem with extremist Christians. There's a problem with extremist vegans and extremist animal rights activists. The second you become an extremist, you're taking it too far. Like, and again, you can't. Somebody's interpretation. It's as ludicrous as you cannot blame the actions of an entire religion on the interpretation of a select few people. Just as you cannot blame, like people will say, you can't blame Second Amendment on this person doing this. No, you're right. He wasn't influenced directly by that. It was the mechanism by which he decided to express his stupidity. And in the same way, this is true of Islamic extremists. But I don't quite understand. There seems to really have been an upturn again in the mainstream, but also in the research community, such as it is. For want of a better word, where it really has gone to a degree of anti-Islamicism.
Yeah, they're back to 9/11, 2001.
Yeah,
like you just talked about Al Qaeda, and now it's very well documented for anybody who bothers to do even a little bit of research that Al Qaeda is an entity of the CIA. The CIA created it.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a video of Hillary Clinton. I think she was at the Council of Foreign Relations talking about the fact that they created Al Qaeda in order to help fight the Soviets in the 1970s in Afghanistan via the Mujahideen.
Yeah.
So we have this whole thing where, now it's very clear that Al Qaeda is a creation of the American intelligence agency, the CIA. And I don't know what it is or what it takes for people to get on board and to understand that they're being played. And so, like you said, what they did was they took Al Qaeda, they rebranded it, and then they made a couple of changes here and there.
Yeah.
They made them ISIS. And there's a lot of people in the truth movement that are pushing that narrative. And it's very, very disconcerting to see. It's very disconcerting, especially when these are the very same people that said on 9/11 that it was not 19 Arabs flying airplanes, that they'll say that it was an inside job. And now they'll turn around and fall back to the 9/11 narrative with regard to what's taking place today.
Yeah, I've seen that. So I've had emails from people basically saying, well, you've had these Islamic attacks in England before, and you'll have them again. And I was like, sorry, when did we have these attacks? 7/7. It's like, dude, like, I thought we'd figured that one out. Like, the fact that there was a hole in the bottom of the train indicates that the bomb was under the train. Like, there's a lot of suggestion that that at least one of the people that was accused wasn't even in London at the time. There's even suggestions that the other three were shot and killed at Canary Wharf. There's lots and lots of contradictory evidence, but what there's no evidence of is really significantly that these guys actually did it. Or that they were actually connected to Islamic extremist groups in the way that they were presented at. But yeah, I've had a few emails from people basically who seem to have sort of forgotten that. And again, I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's quite a long time ago. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it is about 6 or 7 years ago, isn't it? And 9/11 is obviously even longer.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we witnessed these things. Perhaps other people weren't getting into this stuff in the same way, but it does seem strange that people seem to have changed their opinions. And again, you wonder if there are Pied Pipers, perhaps that are doing this, and again, playing on people's emotions, because all of it is, a lot of it is again, it's marketing. There's so many clickbait websites as well that have really sensationalist, like, so-and-so, Hillary Clinton arrested. Like, God, if I see another, like, I can't be bothered to have a go at the website, but people will know which one I mean. Like, there's loads where it's like, this is just not true. You've manipulated the language, and you've done, what you've done is you've taken opinion, you've very cleverly worded it to present a story that's not there. Again, what's strange as well is there seems to be an incredible resurgence. I'm not criticising this per se, because everyone's entitled to their opinion, but very right-wing politics within truth movement, or whatever you wish to call it at the minute. I think one thing that's certainly strange is that Alex Jones and Paul Watson of Infowars and Prison Planet, or whatever it is called, they've very, very obviously shifted from. They used to talk about how they were totally partisan. They were totally impartial. They didn't believe in the left or the right. I remember watching the presidential election DVDs and the 9/11 ones and stuff like that, and they keep repeating the point that they're not left-wing or right-wing. Well, both of them have come out as being overtly right-wing very recently. And, I mean, maybe they know something I don't know, but it certainly, I was curious to see that shift.
Yeah, well, they made the shift with Trump.
Well, yeah, and maybe that's just because they feel that Trump is a better option than Hillary Clinton. But the problem is that it's not necessarily the problem. That's the wrong word. But if you wear Caesar's clothes, you have to start acting like Caesar. And so essentially, if people are pitting themselves with the right purely on the basis of Trump, you're going to have to align yourself with right-wing opinions, basically, which might be more conservative, say.
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem that I have with it, with what Infowars did, is it went from trying to be, I guess, objective with regard to the conspiracies that are out there and the globalism and the globalists and stuff like that. But I don't know how familiar you are with this guy being out in the UK, but there's a guy by the name of Roger Stone.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so he claims that he does not work for the Trump organization, for the Trump campaign, but he sure knows an awful lot about what Donald Trump is about, where he's going, his strategy, his view, his vision, and all that stuff. So really what it is it's obvious that he works for the Trump campaign. He's tied into him heavily. Yeah. And he's on Infowars all the time, talking about all things Trump. Now, for folks who are listening to this, I'm on the outside really still watching the whole thing. So I'm not in the Trump camp. I'm definitely not in the Hillary camp. I've seen enough of the Clintons. So I'm watching it. And what I'm talking about here is I'm not picking on Trump. I'm not picking on Infowars. But it becomes an issue, I think, when you go from presenting yourself as being objective, let's weigh the facts, let's assess things, to now all of a sudden they are clearly aligned with one of the candidates. Now, some people are going to say to me, what other choice do they have, Mike? They're going to go down that path. But I don't know, Neil. It seems to me like
it's strange, isn't it?
Need to maintain objectivity, and they didn't do that. And once you don't do that, then it becomes a different ball of wax. It becomes a different ball game.
Well, the problem is that essentially then, your output is questionable, whether you're showing a degree of bias or whatever. I mean, let's would they run with stories that were anti-Trump, for example? Right. And doesn't it, mate? Listen to how carefully we're trying to say this. Like, crikey, we're just saying opinions, and we're having to be really, really, really careful in case we offend somebody. And all we're talking about is the techniques that are being used. We're not being critical of anybody's political beliefs. We're not being critical of anybody's political allegiances. We're not attacking any political person or any political person's party. We're talking about the marketing and campaign techniques that are used in order to
presentation.
Gain. Yeah. And you could make the argument that having an entity, a large entity like Infowars, is a fabulous campaign push for Trump, because it's certainly going to attract a degree of people that might not have immediately thought of him as the ideal candidate, basically. But I think, again, this kind of just proves our point about social media, that basically we're having to be very, very careful in case somebody thinks, my God, they're obviously working for the Clinton campaign. And it's like, oh, calm down, guys. Like, to be quite honest. The other point, sorry, I meant to make this point earlier, because again, when we're talking about the Islamic extremism and stuff like that, doesn't mean that some idiot's not going to basically say do something horrific because he believes that he's part of this cause, this ideology, and he's trying to show that he's a part of an organisation. It doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't going to go over there and be trained by ISIS in inverted commas, come back and do again something terrible. But if I, as we said before, if I pick up a blue rag and walk into a shopping centre and shoot people, you can't really blame the Crip organisation for that. That's my idiocy. So that's the distinction that I think, for whatever reason, is just not being made. And again, I wonder if it ties back into everything that we've been talking to about before, because it needs to be quick, it needs to be easily explained. Noam Chomsky said this a long time ago, and I know a lot of people not keen on Noam Chomsky, but in some areas he really does know his stuff, and he was basically making a criticism in manufacturing consent. The problem is that geopolitics and even domestic politics and economics and all the various things that actually affect you are really complicated. You can't necessarily get your argument out in a 30-second soundbite or in 140 characters or whatever, and so it does lead to sort of a reduction of ideas, because due to the necessity of the sort of rolling media and stuff like that, you need to have simple ideas, lowest common denominator, reduce things to the point that most people can understand it. And as we well know, nothing really is that black and white in this world. There's always an exception to the rule, and there's always some scenario that could justify even the most horrific and horrendous of actions, or could be seen, or could be manipulated to appear to justify actions. You could murder. You'd never want to murder somebody. But there are actions where murdering somebody could be seen as moral. Yeah. If you're killing somebody as a police officer who's like, the guy that shot the guy that killed the guy that killed Dimebag Darrell, he was totally caught up about that, because I don't think he'd ever drawn his weapon before or whatever. But he saved people's lives. So this is the thing. The world is complicated, and people want easy answers, and this is the problem. People are providing them easy answers.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com, or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace.
We're all ready to go. If you tell us we have to give our lives now, we're ready. I'm pretty sure all the rest of the brothers are with me.